Senator Kaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses. Just a couple of comments and some questions. My assessment of the status of the U.S.-Iran dynamic as adversaries pre-JPOA, pre-November 2013, was that the combined weight of congressional, executive, international sanctions were putting deep pressure on the Iranian economy, hurting and affecting the Iranian economy. That helped bring them to the table. But I don't necessarily think that combined weight of sanctions was slowing down their nuclear program. In fact, it may have accelerated their nuclear program. To the extent that they felt isolated, you can look at them as a resistance economy. They were putting an unreasonable amount of effort into advancing the nuclear program. So the status before the President and American diplomats engaged in this discussion, I think, was one where the sanctions were working against the economy, but the Iranian nuclear program was accelerating in a dangerous way. During the pendency of the JPOA since November of 2013, I've been to Israel twice, once in February of 2014, and then back in January of 2015. And even the Israelis who are worried about an ultimate deal acknowledge, some grudgingly, some enthusiastically, that they think the JPOA period has actually been a positive, that the combination of rollback of some elements of the Iranian program together with additional inspections has been a positive. They like that better than the pre-November 13 status quo. Now we move to the situation of what we're going to think about with respect to a final deal. This is a sincere question. It's going to sound like I'm not sincere, but I'm going to ask it this way. I don't view this as a negotiation about whether Iran will be a friend or an adversary. I view this as a question about whether an adversary will have a nuclear weapon or won't have a nuclear weapon. Do either of you doubt that the region, the United States, and the world are safer if Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon than if they do?
I think this is the primary benefit of a deal that is enforceable. That is, that it will give the region and the United States and our allies there, particularly Israel, a 10 to 15 year nuclear-free Iran, in which we will no longer be faced with this kind of sense that Iran is about to cross the nuclear threshold.
In other words, a bellicose Iran without a nuclear weapon may still be bellicose, but a bellicose Iran with a nuclear weapon is really dangerous in terms of potentially throwing its weight around in the region and in the world.
Correct. And we're talking about a region which is in chaos. And so add a nuclear Iran to the mix, and then the other states in the region will have a very strong incentive to go get nuclear weapons. So we got a nuclear arms race on top of everything else that's going on there. So yes, we need the breathing space. The breathing space is worth something to us, and time is not neutral in this situation. 10 to 15 years, we can use the 10 to 15 years. Roll back Iran.
Absolutely. Let me explore now the decision tree of no deal and deal. I think I agree with what the chair said. I don't think no deal automatically means war, but no deal does have some consequences. How important is it to the effect of the sanctions that currently exist, and more that we might want to put on, that there's an international coalition supporting the sanctions versus the United States just proceeding alone? I'd like to hear both of you talk about that.
At this point, it's very, very important because the sanctions that have really bitten deep are the NDAA sanctions, which are on third countries through their financial systems. Countries actually could resist, but we had both temporary waiver authority, or if they were reducing bit by bit, and frankly, they wanted to help us put Iran under wraps. So they did cooperate, but the cooperation was getting tougher and tougher if you talk to the people who are actually trying to execute it on the U.S. government side. And the second set of sanctions that are really effective are the EU sanctions, which not only ended all imports of Iranian oil, but frankly, through hitting insurance, funds transfers, banking, and other auxiliary elements of the international trade system, really led to Iran losing more than roughly half of its oil exports. That, combined with the drop in oil prices, put Iran in the economic situation we see. So it's important to maintain that if we can't get a deal.
Well, then let me follow up and ask this. So if there is no deal, then it is very critical whether the community perceives that the absence of a deal is because Iran is being unreasonable, or they were willing to be at least somewhat reasonable and the United States or other parties refused to make a deal. So if it looks like Iran is being unreasonable, there's a greater chance to hold the coalition together to keep sanctions tough. If it looks like the U.S. or other partners are being unreasonable, it's more difficult to hold the coalition together. Would you both agree with that?
I think that is exactly right. It depends very much on how the deal breaks down. If there's a deal that meets the requirements of the P5+1 in terms of inspection and snapback and so on, then and let's say that the Congress decides in its wisdom that this isn't a deal that they can support, so we're responsible for, in effect, walking away. I think it will be very hard to maintain the international sanctions in those circumstances. But if Iran refuses to agree, for instance, inspection of its military bases, then we have a great deal of credibility in walking away. And I think actually we should, because I believe that they will then buckle under and accept what we need.
Let me ask about the other part of the decision tree. If there is a deal. If there is a deal that generally meets the April 2 framework and Iran accepts it, we're going to have to dig into the details. I'm particularly interested in inspections. There will be inspections. We want to make sure that they're vigorous, immediate, everywhere. Credible military threat. To my way of thinking, a credible military threat to take out an Iranian nuclear program is combined of some elements. Capacity to do it, backbone, willingness to do it, but also the intel that gives you the information about how to do it. Now, we have intel now. That's been demonstrated in the past, the intel that we have, and that's not going away. But isn't intel plus the additional information that you get from an aggressive and significant inspections regime better than intel without that? And so wouldn't a deal that gives us significant inspections enhance our intelligence and hence enhance the credibility of our military threat?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. Being on the ground and being able to go anywhere, anytime is critically important. We're going to still need the intelligence assets that we've been using and working with our allies and their intelligence capabilities. But being on the ground makes a huge difference. In Iraq, and I had some experience when I served in the Clinton administration on this, when we had inspectors on the ground, even though they were being blocked in various places, you remember that cat and mouse game that we always played. Nevertheless, we had a much better insight into Iraq's nuclear program. In fact, we were at that point comfortable about retiring the nuclear file because we were persuaded, because of the inspections, that on that front, as opposed to chemical and biological, we actually knew what they had and knew that we were able to monitor it and control it and prevent them from getting nuclear weapons. So I think that was a very interesting example of the way in which both give us an ability to know. And in this case, the inspectors are going to be at the mine head, at the milling, at the enrichment process, at the stockpiling, and in Iraq, the plutonium reactor, the heavy water reactor. So we're going to have a full visibility on their program, and that goes on for, I think it was 25 years of that kind of inspection. I think that will give us some degree of assurance that we will know if they cheat.
Thank you. I will interject that, and that was a good line of questioning.